Hey guys, thanks for joining in. As you can see from the title, I got a bit of a decision to make here at the end of the season. It doesn't feel like the end of the season. There's still plenty of snow around, but being realistic, we know the track's conditions and trail conditions are going to start to deteriorate a bit. So we don't know if we're going to squeeze in one more session or not. We'll see. But obviously, as you can tell from the title, I had to take a decision on which one of these sleds I'm going to sell for the year to make room for a test sled for next year. The reality is that we always have one additional sled, and some of you may laugh and joke about that because we have ridden Polarises for a very long time, and when you have a Polaris, you better plan on having a bit of a backup. And even though that's kind of a joke, and we joke quite a bit about it, this year that actually played out true. Mike's machine at about 7,700 miles did go in for some issues. It looks like either the head bolts or cylinder bolts stretched and caused a head gasket to start leaking. He was starting to leak a little bit of coolant, and before that got too bad, obviously we took that in to get covered by the dealer. The good news is, obviously it's covered underneath warranty. The bad news is that was in January, and it is coming up in the middle of March, and we haven't seen that sled back yet. So the reality is we were planning on riding our Polarises quite a bit and fitting in the SkiDoo from time to time, but the SkiDoo became one of our main machines because the other Polaris was gone, which really makes me scratch my head about some of these Polarises. And look, I understand that there's supply chain issues. It's tough getting things like pistons, as an example. Some of these you should be able to get like a piston. There are problems getting. But the good news is on this machine here, on this VR1, it has over 8,200 miles, or roughly 8,200 miles, and it still has the original top end. Matter of fact, it's the original motor, and I went ahead and tested the compression today, and we're still at 150 psi on both cylinders, which is amazing to me. The other thing I'll note about this machine is that last year, there were a number of issues that we found. As an example, with the bearings that we found on the drive axle, there were issues there. There were bearing issues on the jack shaft. We lubed and greased those. The dealer did take care of those, thank goodness. We had a couple of other small things that we didn't like about this machine that needed to get fixed along the way. Lost the bogey wheel, etc. But this year, what I will note about this machine is that we've been on this about 4,500 miles, swapping back and forth on this particular machine, because we didn't have Mike's machine running for quite some time this year. So 4,500 miles on this machine and didn't have a single issue with it whatsoever. Matter of fact, as I mentioned, we're sitting at 8,200 miles on this original top end, and I was debating on kind of preemptively doing it over here the winter, and I probably should. However, it is covered by warranty, and as long as we have a backup sled, Polaris joke, I know, I love it, we should be in relatively good shape. So this machine has been really, really good for me this year. Last year, I guess I had a couple of bumps and bobbles along the way. This year, not a problem whatsoever. Just started up, rode it. You guys will note that in an earlier video, I did clean the exhaust valves. Every ride we take, we come back. We've had 4 rides this year, and we did about 5,350 miles. So you can kind of do the math. It's kind of 1,300 miles per ride. I come back, I pull the plugs, I check the compression, and obviously go through the rest of the maintenance. So it's been general maintenance on this, nothing else. Of course, swapping those plugs is probably the only additional item, because on the SkiDoo, obviously you still have to check bogey wheels, check the track, check your skags. It's all the same things. On this one here, obviously you have to keep adding oil and clean its exhaust valves. On the Mach Z, I had to do an oil change. Obviously, after we broke the motor in, I want to do an oil change, get that thing moving forward for the season. On the Mach Z, as you all could probably imagine, we didn't have too many issues at all. We had a tail light that wasn't properly plugged in. That was a pretty easy fix. We had this, kind of windscreen that was shaking about quite a bit. Not a really big problem, but everything kind of held together as you would imagine. It's a SkiDoo. It's going to be pretty darn reliable, and it was. We didn't have any, I would say, any issues necessarily that we noticed from supply chain, with exception to one thing, which is, even though I just picked on the Polaris for not having parts to repair my snowmobile this year, I didn't receive this SnowCheck Mach Z until well into January. Really, it was coming up into February where we were nervous we were even going to have this snowmobile for our V500 ride. It did make it in time, thank goodness. And I rode the snowmobile for that 520 miles that we did, or 522, whatever it was, for that charity ride. And Mike rode then my VR1, so we could actually go and still do the charity event, which is really sad when you think about it. We were doing something nice for charity, and Mike didn't actually have a sled to ride. So of course I had to loan him my sled over here, the VR1. What's interesting about that ride is that we got to the end, and Mike was feeling pretty good. He rode that VR1 all day long, and I was a little bit more beat up than I usually am. And it's kind of interesting because in other videos, we noted that the suspension, the rear suspension on this is better than the VR1. We think that this semi-active suspension is way better than the VR1. The seat is cushy and plush and nice, which is somehow better than the VR1. But the reality is, what we found is that you're less tired riding the VR1, and the simple reason is because of turns. Turns on this machine, relative to that machine, will wear you out. So we're going to do in today's videos, I want to show you some video of where this Ski-Doo Mach Z absolutely shines. And then I'm going to show some video of where this Polaris VR1 absolutely shines. And from those videos, you can decide what your riding style is and what your riding type is. And you can decide which one you would sell or keep, and as well as which you might pick up for next year. Well, before getting to the verdict on which one of these sleds I am selling for this year, let's go ahead and recap real quick what I think this Mach Z does exceptionally well. First off, if you are at very high speed, if you're constantly going over 100 miles an hour, if you're 110, 115, this machine to begin with does 122 miles an hour according to its speedometer, which they're relatively close. Is it real speed? Doesn't matter, at least it's relative, one versus the other. So this will do 122 miles an hour. That I was able to register 112 on an ice road, this 122 on the same ice road. So if top speed is your thing and you find yourself constantly being at high speed pace, a lot of straightaways, this is a very, very, very fast machine. Furthermore, I would say that if you're going that speed, we're over 90 miles an hour, 95, I'm not gonna lie, I start to feel a little bit sketchy with that Polaris. It's not as stable. Of course, it's a little bit lighter machine, and you sit up on top of it where you sit a little bit more down in on this Mach Z. I felt very, very comfortable on this Mach Z at high speed. So if that's important to you and you have a lot of straight runs, point to point, this is a great machine for it. As well, we noted that this got better fuel economy than the VR1. This got on average for us about 13 to 14 miles per gallon. We're seeing about 10 or 11 on this VR1. And that's important because the fuel tank on this is less anyhow. This is a 9.5 tank, which is less than that VR1. What else this machine does very, very well, as I mentioned, is suspension. No doubt about it, the suspension on these weird square little bumps that would usually buck your sled and make you go flying, which we found on the VR1, this will eat them up. That semi-adaptive or semi-active suspension takes care of it, and really is a way to forgive you for some of your errors and sins going into a squared off bump that you didn't see. This does that way better. The other thing I really like about this sled, obviously, is the luggage configuration. It has great wind protection. Of course, the VR1 now has some better luggage configuration options. And obviously the new system on the VR1 was way better than they had before. And the link system we've praised in the past, but this year I lost the link value. You guys will remember that from the last video. I do like, as well, I would say, the optionality between the motor modes, between the Eco, Sport, and Regular, as well as the suspension modes, the Sport or Sport Plus or Comfort. It's nice to toggle between those. They work very, very well. As I mentioned, you're able to use these hand guards with this mid-screen, which is great. The bar warmers worked great on both. I can't say one was better than the other. Let's get into the things I think that this doesn't do that well. First off, the one thing I think the Mach Z does, well, I'm not going to say terrible, but not as good as the VR1 is, it just doesn't like to turn. It's got more weight. You know it has more weight. And going into a turn, you are using a lot more effort to get this around the turn. And if you can get the bars moving, which is, yes, you can get them moving. I did mention in another video, it wasn't as heavy as I thought it was going to be, and that was kind of true, but it's still heavier than a VR1. But once you get this thing into the turn, it just can't go around the turn as fast as the VR1. There's nothing you can do about it. Maybe that's a physics thing, or maybe that's a geometry thing. It's the way that it's set up. I don't know, but this is a much more complicated sled to get around turns. Also, I'll say let's call it the infotainment system, if you will. The gauge in the dash, it is exceptionally frustrating to me for a couple of reasons. One is when we're switching back and forth between sleds. Once I'd switch back over to the sled, I'd plug in my phone, the Bluetooth would hook to the Mach Z, okay, good. Then the Bluetooth would hook to my helmet, okay, good. And then there's a hard line that has to connect the USB ultimately to the phone. And so this would take, I would say, about 4 or 5 minutes getting back on the machine the first time if everything went well, but very often it would fail in one of those items. or you'd finally get the USB hooked up and you slide into the bag and one little wiggle of that USB cord and it disconnected again. It was exceptionally frustrating. Where on the VR1 you jump on it, the gauge is there, and away you go. And furthermore, what I don't like about the BRP gauge is it works well when you have perfect cell phone signal, but as many as you know, around here riding snowmobiles in the wilderness, we don't have perfect cell phone signal. So by far, I would say that that VR1 7S display, it blows the doors off of this machine. As I covered in the other video, maintenance is overall going to be about the same. It depends. It depends if, and look, a lot of you actually, and it was the right comment, said, you know, Joe, I don't think we should call that motor a 20,000 mile motor. It will probably go much longer on that Mach Z, and that could be right. But at the same time, I was calling this motor a 7,500 mile motor, and we're at 82, and I'm going to keep running it to see what happens for this next season. I think I might get 10 or 12,000 miles out of it on this Polaris two-stroke top end, which is kind of amazing to say that you can go that far. I would never even think about doing that just a couple of years ago. It's pretty remarkable. Finally, a couple other gripes about this Mach Z. The lights, and I think that everyone's aware of it, the lights are terrible. I was joking in the last video, the lights didn't work that well because we were in a pretty big snowstorm. If they'd actually worked, I would have had much more reflection, but I was using low beams and was able to get around in this snowstorm because I couldn't see. I couldn't see because there was, low lights, the lights not on, and it was snowing pretty hard. So that's the one place, I guess, where this Mach Z shines. And finally, I guess if I'm going to give one more benefit, which I didn't talk about before, which is if you want to get yourself a really, really good workout and you enjoy going into turns and getting pretty hot and sweaty, then please go ahead and get this Mach Z. You're going to really enjoy it for the workout. You're going to feel incredible at the end of the trip. You're actually going to be pretty sore. Feel pretty good when you get yourself all bulked up, recognizing that you can't get around a turn in this thing nearly as fast as this one. Okay, guys, on to the Polaris. Things that it does exceptionally well. 7S display, just mentioned it before, don't want to go into it again. It's great, it works. Obviously, without GPS, you can see your buddy. I know how far away he is. It's perfect. Ergonomics are amazing. Handling is perfect. And this little motor that could, look, I think that, in looking back in hindsight, some of the 800 motors that I had in this, in this setup, or just one prior generation, a couple prior years before, those 800s were pretty high strung. They ran really, really fast. This motor to me feels a little bit detuned off of that. It's pretty fast. I do like it, but it's really, really smooth and linear. And it's weird to say this, it's actually more linear than this 4-stroke motor because this 4-stroke got this turbo in it. So this has a really nice motor to it. Now, it doesn't have the same top speed. Let's just call it out what it is. And really, where that turbo is starting to pull over 95 miles an hour, this 2-stroke is starting to fade off. Obviously, it's not going to get over 110, 115. And look, this is still speedometer speed. I don't want to pretend this is GPS speed, but they are pretty relatively close in terms of their error, I suppose, or their overestimation of speed, so that it is relative arrangement. So this machine handles so darn good, and what I would say is that you would never know or never notice it. If you rode with nothing but SkiDoo guys, that Mach Z is the way to go. Even if you rode with guys that have other 4-stroke sleds, this SkiDoo is the way to go. And if you want a 4-stroke sled, I think that this Mach Z is absolutely tough to beat. The only time you're going to get really sad is when you're in tight turns, in tight woods, or any type of turn for that matter, where you're getting a lot of sequential or subsequent turns, and you're with somebody who has one of these VR1s, or even the Axis chassis. They were really darn fast going through those turns. The reason you're going to get upset is the Polaris riders won't be working that hard, and they'll be going exceptionally fast through the woods, and you'll be yoking that machine back and forth trying to keep up. And you're going to be absolutely frustrated. And you're going to get yourself to a point where you might be starting to go a little faster in the straight to keep up. You might be going into a turn a little bit more riskier than you would otherwise. And look, we've gone back to back on different trails, swapping back and forth on these sleds. And you can ride this sled, this VR1, at 50 or 60%, and you are 80 or 90% of riding that sled. This thing can just walk away, and there's no effort whatsoever when it comes to the turns. Where the Polaris could absolutely improve is, look, it is what it is. It's a 2-stroke. You have to put oil in it. I believe that overall maintenance is going to be more on this Polaris. As I did just mention, there were some supply chain issues this year. Maybe that gets fixed up with COVID. The joke, which is not the third time I said it, is that we actually have a backup sled because we know that these things are going to fail. So there are some things that they can do better. Obviously, I just mentioned about the Mach Z. The ability to have the hand wind guards are excellent. I love having that. You can't fit them on this sled. My biggest beef with this machine, even though the chassis actually makes up for quite a bit. My biggest beef with this machine is actually the suspension. To not be able to have rebound adjustment, first off, on a higher end sled is kind of despicable if you ask me. And this machine will get itself in trouble. Whenever you bottom the suspension, it's the bump afterwards that really is going to buck you off this sled, or try to buck you off this sled. So you have to be really careful about those square G out bumps, knowing what you get behind it. Now, we've learned to ride these machines knowing that. When we see them, we slow down, we flag each other, we do a really good job of doing this. But that's where this machine can get you in trouble. So it definitely needs to get better suspension. Now, how often do you notice it? Maybe, let's say 3 or 4 bumps a day in a long day. That's when you're going to notice it. But it's real. And where this active suspension or semi-active suspension over there, it takes care of, it erases all of those problems. Just a few quick product mentions for this year. Obviously, I'll mention it again, AMSOIL, thank you again for donating oil to the cause for the charity ride that we did. 2 cases of oil was amazing. You didn't have to do it. I really appreciate it. It went a long way for sure. So I appreciate that AMSOIL. Second off is Stud Boy Shaper bars, or the Shaper front skegs. Holy heck, much to my surprise. And now we have roughly 2,000 miles on them. They're only halfway gone at best. I mean, they still got a lot of miles left in them. Where before with Woodies, we were replacing those things easily every 1,500 miles. There just wasn't much left on them. We're riding the exact same places we ride. It just so happens that these Shaper bars did much better. Now listen, I'm planning on doing the Bergstrom test this next year. I know that we've got a lot of comments about that. I do appreciate that. We will be going in that direction for next year. So there's a couple of products I wanted to mention from this past year that we got a chance to try. Also, we did try that AMSOIL. It was like a silicone. It's used for a dirt bike. This little spray sprayed on it did keep the machines relatively nice. So I'd stick with that for next year as well. So then I guess what's the verdict for which machine I'm going to sell? I have a machine with about 2,600 miles on it that is excellent. It's a technology wonder. It's a very, very fast turbo 4-stroke. And I've got this 2-year-old, now 2-year-old VR1 with 8,200x miles on it that I know the top end's going to go eventually here. And look, we rated these machines, and it was clear if you take a look at the categories in the last video why we rated this Mach Z above this VR1. But for me, and for the riding that I do, I'm keeping this VR1. I'm actually selling the Mach Z. This wasn't a sales video to see if you wanted to buy the Mach Z. However, for real, it is for sale. I'll be reasonable. It's got a nice warranty on it. And look, to be honest, I've never even launched that Mach Z. I just refuse to do it because I don't think it's a great thing to do to a sled to tear it up. This thing's been gently taken care of. Nothing but nice Michigan UP trails. It's ready for sale. And I'm going to keep this old girl, this old VR1, and we'll see what I add this next year. This will probably end up being our workhorse backup machine for next year. Anyhow, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. We do have some videos we're going to put together here. If this happens to be the last video of the season, we have some couple surprises we're going to put together. And thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate all the feedback you've given. And guys, be safe out there. Appreciate it. Oh my goodness. I wonder if anyone from KBC watches snowmobile videos. They really need to, because I'm drinking this beer anyhow. It sure is delicious. But it would be nice to get this with some 2-stroke oil. I'm just saying. Widowmaker for the win. Oh. Hey guys.
Hey guys, I want to say thank you. Obviously, thank you for watching the videos this year and for all your feedback. But more importantly, I mean, thank you all for being part of this brotherhood. It's one of the most amazing things. And we only came upon snowmobiling, really in the past kind of 5 or 6 years. And it's been an absolute joy for us. It's what we look forward to all year long. Probably like you all, we wait for the videos to come out. We're looking at every video out there. We're trying to learn about the brands. But more importantly, we love the brotherhood. We love, being out there, being in the snow and helping each other out and having fun. It's a true adrenaline rush. There's no doubt about it, but I think the camaraderie is even better. So listen, I mean, we're not opposed or adverse to our own situations and incidents. This year, Mike took my VR1 into a bit of a puddle, and honestly, kind of got a little bit stuck. Without having a couple of riders come along, I don't know, we might still be stuck right now. And it was great because I said to him, thank you so much. We really appreciate your help. And he laughed at me. He said, what else are we going to do? We're snowmobilers. Of course we help each other out. And I love that. So guys, I don't know if it's the end of the season or not. I don't want to admit it if it is. If it is the end of the season, I really want to say thank you very much. Like I said, we have a couple of video surprises coming up. I just really appreciate all of you for your feedback, and I really appreciate all you guys out there on the trail, and I hope to see you again this next year. We'll bring together, of course, some initial product tests, probably a new snowmobile test as well. Thanks, guys. Be safe out there. We'll see you soon.
Ring,